Men rising up to end the silence around us about the chains that bind us, to dispel the darkness of illusion with luminous spiritual technologies, to finally become the hero within us all. This is Arise, the Honest Man's podcast. As per usual, I am Karuna Avatar Das, and my dear co-host Jai Jagannath Prabhu is by my side. We also have two very, very esteemed guests with us today. His Grace Mahatma Prabhu, my spiritual master, who is gracing us with his presence for, I think, the third time today, or the fourth time. The fourth time. Actually, maybe Mahatma Prabhu has taken over Hari Vilas Prabhu as our most regular guest, and so we're very, very fortunate to have you with us, Srila Gurudev. Thank you so much for coming and for suggesting this. And then we also have His Grace Radhikesa Prabhu with us. He is a most esteemed personality, and I will be introducing him properly in just a second. But just to let everyone know about today's topic, astrology, the intricacies of karma, determinism, and Prabhupada's perspective on things. And we're going to get real with Radhikesa Prabhu. We're going to ask him difficult questions, but he is certainly well prepared. So there will be no uncomfortabilities, and just really get into the intricacies of this particular topic. So just a introduction for Radhikesa Prabhu to give everyone an idea of his background. Dr. Radhikesa completed the Doctorate of Medicine from Wright State University with a residency in internal medicine. He was in private practice for over 20 years in multiple settings, including being the CEO of a medical practice. Both his grandfather, great-grandfather, and all generations before them were Ayurvedic doctors and astrologers. In 2012, he began an extensive study of astrology, which enlivened his passion to care for and connect with people in an unconventional way. Now a retired physician, he practices astrology full-time. Through ancient wisdom and modern science, Dr. Radhikesa offers innovative insights to support individuals in their growth and healing on a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level. His knowledge of Vedic astrology and meditation has assisted hundreds of people in their journey to health and prosperity. And he has just completed his first book on astrology, which will be released very shortly. And so certainly a most qualified, esteemed personality, and we're so much looking forward to hearing your insights, Radhikesa Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Can I say something?
Please.
So I know Radhikesa for many years. Our families know one another. His daughters, my daughters are friends. So he asked me if we could discuss this topic publicly. So I said, okay, but first I have to ask you the hard questions. So boom, boom, boom. I was shooting questions like arrows. And he was answering them all to my great satisfaction. And I, after he answered them, I thought, this is important because there's confusion. I think in many devotees' minds, there's confusion around astrology. Should I use it? Shouldn't I? Is it good? Is it bad? Does it mean I don't have faith in Krishna, et cetera, et cetera? So I was very satisfied with his answers, and I thought, this is going to be very enlightening, and it's going to clarify a lot of things. I think maybe answer a lot of doubts. So we're encouraging all of you who are watching live to ask hard questions, and like Karunavatar said, we're going to ask some hard questions. Probably not hard for Radhikesh, but they sound like they're hard.
Okay, I don't. Where's the natural place to begin? Maybe the title of today's episode, Karma, Determinism, and I'm going to add the element of like free will, because there's always that philosophical question around the discussion of karma and fate and the actual ability to make choices. And fate and free will, this becomes a question that comes up commonly, especially when beginning. But I think even now, the whole concept of agency is like a very subtle point. Even in Bhakti philosophy, it's a little bit of a subtle point. And I guess the yeah, how much of our life is, well, it's determined in terms of the sort of physical aspect of it or conventional parts, and how much do we actually have the ability to make choice despite dealing with some of these more determined factors. Maybe that might be a natural place to start the discussion, since that's the title of the show, or the subtext of the show: karma, determinism, and free will. And then, of course, Krishna and Prabhupada. Maybe we can start there.
I just, adding on to that, and just to illustrate that a little bit, like, I used to live in an ashram with an astrologer, someone who at the time was like a very, very, he was like the ashram leader, a very senior person. He's a genius, a mystic, and his astrological insights were always super fascinating. And I have just found that in my own life, kind of like getting advice from him. I also just want to say that Radhikesa Prabhu did a reading for me last week, and it was incredible, like the insights that he was able to provide, and that's an experience that I'll also unpack as we go along. But just from my previous experience with this one person that I'd gotten astrological advice from, he had revealed certain things to me, certain things that were bound to happen in phases of life that I was bound to go through, that I found like that it was like really big, like big stuff, and things where I was like, I found it to be like a very constant meditation. Oh my gosh, this is going to happen, and so like I have to arrange my life around this thing that's going to manifest, and so on, and then I almost find myself to be like a little bit like stifled by that, or like I can't make decisions freely because because there's there's so that sort of deterministic influence is really bewildering.
Okay. Yes, so this is a good place to start. The first very important thing, and first of all, to everybody out there and to you guys, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm so excited to talk about this topic. Astrology, the first thing that everybody should know, there's a lot of not misinformation, but misperceptions about what astrology actually is. Astrology is a very active and dynamic science. It's something that, in terms of your karma, you can change and work with. It's not that if the astrologer or some, has predicted, well, things will happen this way. This can be a guideline, and it can mean that, all right, this is something I can change. So, for example, if you've got, somebody predicted that, well, you're going through this very difficult period at this time, that's something you can work with. It's similar to, if a doctor tells you, oh, you've got a risk of getting, diabetes when you're 40 years old, and you see that, and then you can watch your diet and exercise, and maybe that risk gets minimized. So it's the same way with astrology, but you're dealing with subtle energies. All these planetary beings we deal with, whether Saturn or Jupiter or Mars, they're all devtas, they're demigods, and they're bringing karma into our life. If we know that, okay, I have this heavy period of Saturn that's beginning for me at a certain point, and just like oh, I have a risk for diabetes at a certain point in my life, you can do some things that will minimize that effect of Saturn and decrease that risk. The key with astrology is understanding that it's a science. It's a material science. Just like medicine and law and engineering, these are sciences. So we use it for our material benefit. It's not, strictly speaking, part of our spiritual life, but it comes from the Vedas, so it's kind of in between both of those things. On one nice talk Prabhupada gave May 3rd, 1969, at the Arlington Street Church in Boston, somebody asked him this question about astrology, and Prabhupada said, we follow astrology. It's just like medical science, legal science, engineering science. It's a science, and you use it for your benefit. So this is one place where Prabhupada spoke strongly about it. And we can get into others. But that's kind of the basics of where astrology goes and how we can use it in our life. It's just guideposts to different things that may happen. And it can help because it gives clarity on issues. If someone's going through a different time where they feel they're restricted or blocked in the things that are going on, a lot of times you'll see, okay, there's a influence of Mars or an 8th house influence of Saturn going on. And you can see, okay, this will end at this point in time. Please be patient. In another, 1 month, 2 months, whatever it may be, this problem will start to resolve. You do your best on the practical level to try to fix it, but it will go away at this point in time. So you can get clarity on issues that are important to you. For some people, it's job-related issues, money-related issues, trouble with their marriage, health problems, whatever it may be. It can give clarity and it can give a timeline. But the other thing, more importantly, it does for people is that it allows them to see that they're not fully in control of everything, that there are more subtle energies that are involved in our life. That's also very important because it helps put all these, supposed difficulties in perspective.
Prabhu, something that I'm noticing about the way that you're speaking about astrology that I find very interesting is that you say you use the word "it" quite a lot, like it can do this for you, it can do that for you, and so on, referring to the science of astrology itself. But what because the science is the science, right? Like it works in a particular way, it has its mechanics and so on. But the science is nothing without the person that engages with it. So basically, I want to separate the science of astrology from the person, from the practitioner. And I want to really bring it to this point of you are an astrologer, you're a practitioner of the science, right? Just like you were a medical doctor, you were a physician. So basically, you constantly have to interpret what you're seeing, what you're reading, and the information that you then give people in accordance with that interpretation. That's a very, very, very big responsibility. And so, like, my question to you is, how do you meditate? Like, what is your meditation on, like, that responsibility that you hold, and how do you think about your personal discernment in terms of like what you say to people and what you don't say to them, because it can have a massive influence on someone's life.
Yes,
what they hear from you.
That is absolutely right. It can have a massive impact on what people feel in their life. The first and most important thing, I pray to Krishna before every reading I do, to simply allow me to be an instrument of compassion and kindness in this world to this person. And this is the most important thing an astrologer can do, is use and understand that this knowledge is given to you by Krishna. You're empowered with this knowledge. And with that sense of humility, to be an instrument of compassion and kindness, you use that knowledge. So this is my first meditation when I go into any reading, to how to use what's happening in this person's life to allow them to develop in their own spiritual life, to follow their own spiritual path deeply, and to be able to weather the storms that inevitably come into our lives in the best way. Not just that they're good for the next 6 months or year, but what's going to be good for them through the rest of their life and the lives that may come after that. And this is the essence of being an astrologer, is to give guidance not on their material life and the things that may be causing blockages or when things are going to get better, but at the same time helping people understand that this is a journey they're taking, and there's many divine beings and energies out there that are helping them on this journey. They're not alone.
What about my job today is to play the devil's advocate. So that's what I'm going to do, because I'm not going to.
That's usually my job, but I'm really.
We'll do it together, tag team. We could be tag team.
And the baton.
Because I'm not going to speak a lot, but I will speak in terms of explanation of the question. So this idea comes up in the second chapter of the Gita. We should transcend duality, be equal poised, happiness, distress, victory, loss, gain, infamy, defeat, fame, infamy, victory, defeat, etc. And the theme is tolerance, because that's how you transcend duality. And Krishna says you have to practice this. So the argument would be, why do I need to find out that I'm going into a difficult situation? Because if I just practice second chapter of the Gita, then I'll be ready for anything. Whatever the world throws at me, I'll be ready for it. So is it a would a devotee feel like, well, I need it because I'm not that advanced? Or would someone else feel, well, maybe it's a compromise of my Krishna consciousness? I'm like I should be able to do this without astrology. So how would you understand that?
Can I amplify that with a small anecdote also?
Yeah.
Radhikesa, I've been to an astrologer twice in my life, and it was the same astrologer about 3 or 4 years apart. And I went to this astrologer both times to help me address problems with my health. The first time I went to him, he really helped me a lot. I actually had practically zero faith in astrology, precisely because of points like Mahatma Prabhu just made. So what was the need? It was superfluous, because I'll just depend on the knowledge of the Gita and Bhakti dissolves Prarabdha karma, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I was having some health issues. Some devotees made an arrangement for me to meet an astrologer. I met him. The reading was like really good, and he helped me with some issues around my health. I went to the same astrologer 4 years later. He had become also some sort of Ayurvedic businessman, which is maybe an important caveat. But he gave me a reading. He gave me a reading that had me very fearful for an entire year about a particular disease that was supposed to come up, and that it was going to be very intense, and that I should get married so that my wife can help support me during this very difficult phase of my life. It was like a very intense reading. And because I went to this astrologer 4 years before and he had helped me tremendously, I was naturally inclined to accept that he has some authority in what he was saying and reading. And of course, he said, of course, don't worry, it's not gonna, I have some Ayurvedic treatments that can help you. And so there might have been a little bit of a sales pitch going on as I reflect on it later. And I kind of just took shelter of Harinam, and I started chanting. I was literally chanting all day. I wasn't trying to pray to Krishna to remove this particular difficulty or anything. And it so happened that the difficulty didn't come, it didn't manifest at all, as he described it. And so it led me to this conviction. I have to admit, it led me to a conviction that, you know what, I believe that astrology is a genuine science, because this guy genuinely helped me previously, and there must be genuine astrologers out there. But I'm just going to depend on my Krishna conscious knowledge to get me through life, because I felt like my 1 year of my life was sabotaged by this particular reading, which I couldn't get out of my head. I couldn't shake it. And so I was like, you know what, let me just depend on my knowledge to get me through life, and not, just deal with the problems as they come head on. So this anecdote is an amplification of what Mahatma Prabhu was putting to the table. Like, why we need this? We can just depend on the knowledge of the Gita. And I actually have that personal conviction after this experience. So I wanted to use that as an anecdote to demonstrate this idea.
Very good question. And this is something that a lot of people ask, why do we need to bother? So there's many ways in which you look at this. If we simply say, oh, I'm not going to worry about anything, no matter what happens, I'm just going to depend on Krishna and tolerate. If you fall down and break your arm, you're going to go to the doctor. If you have some massive legal problem and the tax authorities coming after you, you may hire a expert in that to help you with that problem. So it's not that we don't deal with our problems. Because you tolerate a problem doesn't mean you don't use your intelligence to fix that problem. You can say, oh, I'm going to jump off this cliff and depend on Krishna. No, we don't do that. We use our intelligence to solve whatever issues may be out there. And this is the same way with astrology. Remember, astrology is a science. Just like you have, and like we just mentioned, how Prabhupada spoke about medical science or legal science. We use these material things for our material benefit. So you could certainly fall down and break your arm and say, I'm just going to tolerate this. This is what Krishna wants. But this is not the intelligent thing to do when you have, either Ayurvedic doctor or a medical doctor, someone who can help you fix that problem and heal your arm. So it's the same way in astrology. If an astrologer finds, it's a little harder for people sometimes because it's subtle, because it's not grossly manifest right in front of you. Saturn or Jupiter is not standing in front of you, overtly showing you that I'm bringing you this karma. So it's the same type of thing. The astrologer can see that, okay, these planets are causing the difficulty in your life. If we do these things, it'll go away. It's just like, I'll go back to the example of having, knowledge of different types of foods. You know which foods are good for you or which foods are bad for you or are good for your body type, Ayurvedically, and you'll use that knowledge to your best advantage for your material life. It's the same way with astrology. We use it for the best advantage to our material life. There's very few people who have completely transcended their karma and conditioning. So certainly there may be some out there who are not bothered by the effects of, the body and the mind and other beings and natural phenomena that may occur, like Haridas Thakur when the prostitute was present with him. But there's very few people like that. Certainly, if we're at the point where we've overcome all our karma and conditioning, we can just say, okay, whatever happens, happens. But for most people, we're still affected by the karma and conditioning and the difficulties that happen in this world. And so astrology can really give you guidance as at the subtle level what those things are and how you overcome those.
Can you give an example? Let's say I'm going through a situation and I'm having a hard time tolerating it. Could you give some examples, just general examples, what someone would do, like you said, to lessen the effects of that?
Of course. So there's, this happens pretty much every day where somebody will come and they look, this is a very common one. That last 3 years, I can't find a job, or the job I have, I've been hating it. Can you please look at my chart and see what's going on? And then you'll look at the 10th house, which is the house of work, and you may see a very malefic influence of Saturn or Rahu or something like that there. So when you look at that, you're like, look, this is, some karma that's coming into your life from Shani. This is Saturn. And Saturn, there's different things you can do to help solve those problems. So Saturn is a devotee of Lord Nrsingadev. So a lot of times, what I'll tell people is, look, Saturn is a devotee of Lord Nrsingadev. This is the planet that's bringing this karma into your life, this personality whose gross manifestation is the planet. If you do this mantra for Saturn, which is actually a prayer to Lord Nrsingadev, so this is something that Vaishnavas can chant, this will minimize that karma. When we perform certain, and these mantras are more like ritualistic, like karma kanda type activities, because they're for our material life. I said, if you perform this mantra with the proper understanding of who Saturn is as a devotee of Krishna, then his effect will be minimized. The karma he's bringing to you will be minimized, because by the laws of nature, he has a responsibility to bring our karma, but when we act in certain ways or do certain ritualistic activities, he has to minimize that effect. The relationship we had with these planets is not like the relationship we're trying to develop with Krishna. With Krishna, we're trying to develop a relationship of love and service. With a lot of these planetary entities, with these demigods, these are relationships more in a
transactional, yeah.
Yes, this is a transactional relationship. Rituals are doors. They're doors to our greater spiritual evolution. But the key to opening any door, because every door requires a key, the key to opening that door of a ritual is humility and respect. As long as those ritualistic activities are done with a proper understanding, they can give us the results that we're looking for. If they're done in a mood of arrogance or pride or indifference, they're not going to give us the results.
Okay.
Could I ask a follow-up question? It's related to the same topic we're already bringing up, if it's okay.
Yes.
Mahatma Prabhu, if it's okay, I just want to ask this follow-up question.
Yeah, you're probably going to ask the question I was going to ask.
Because in my case, it's turned into a conviction due to this experience with this astrologer. So maybe this topic is important to me. And I'm not confident I have a proper or a complete understanding of the function of astrology. So the way I'm thinking about it, hearing you speak, is that astrology can kind of give us insight to some of the, I'm going to use this language, the sort of biological psychological, maybe sociological conditionings that will cause us to lean towards being a statistic, so to speak. Like, because we're conditioned to like respond to things in very specific ways because of our karmic inheritance. And so we, in that sense, we become a statistic. But despite biological conditioning or psychological conditioning, you can still, even with those pressures, make another decision, which gives understanding that we still have free will despite those conditionings. And so, is that okay so far? I'm not.
Yes.
So what I want to understand is that it seems like astrology is one type of knowledge that informs you how you're conditioned and how there will be a tendency to be a statistic in a particular way. But it seems like there's another type of knowledge required for you to not be that statistic and to make the sort of choices that would ultimately, be good for you and not just according to how you're conditioned. And so I guess the reason it's turned into a conviction for me is that I was informed in a particular way of something that was going to manifest in my particular life. And, there was a tendency for the body and the mind to respond to that information in a way that would make me a statistic. And I kind of just, chanted Hare Krishna, and the things that were supposed to come didn't happen that time. And so it got me like really having funny feelings about astrology, even though now I actually, before I didn't even accept the authenticity of it. Now I accept the authenticity of it, but I don't engage with it because it seems to me that the knowledge that will allow me to make the choices that won't make me a statistic of my karma is another type of knowledge that astrology isn't. And so I just need to depend on that sort of knowledge. And that is the knowledge coming from Gita or the Bhakti Shastras and so on. So I don't know. Yeah, I guess maybe you can harmonize this a little bit, but this is what's going on in my thinking. Astrology gives me the playing field, but the knowledge that allows me to move outside of that is another type. And that's the knowledge that I'm going to just use to navigate my life.
Right. That's a very good question. I'll comment. I'll use an analogy to describe this. Astrology describes the inclinations we may have in our life. Suppose there's two people who are given a cigarette and said, smoke this cigarette. If there's one person who's been smoking 2 packs a day for 20 years and the other person has never smoked a cigarette in their life, both of them make the choice on what they're going to do. The one who has been smoking for 20 years, he's going to be much more inclined to pick up that cigarette and smoke, as opposed to the one who never has, where it won't become an effort. So this is what astrology tells us. We have inclinations towards certain behaviors. And this is the material level of science. But through bhakti, through devotion, which is the spiritual level, we have the ability to change those inclinations or modify those inclinations and find a way through those. Just like if two people walk past a bar, one is a former alcoholic and one has never had a drink in their life. The one who is a former alcoholic will probably run past that bar as fast as he can so he doesn't get tempted. While the one who's who never drank in his life could probably walk into the bar, sit down, eat some pretzels and walk out and, never have any problems whatsoever. So we have inclinations towards certain behaviors, but certainly by our choice, and this is where we have this free will, we choose whether to follow that inclination or not. But most people in this world, either they're not aware of their inclinations or they don't think they're strongly influenced by their inclinations. But when they become more aware of them, they can actually recognize and fight against the ones which are negative, and the ones which can help them and be supportive of them in their spiritual life, they can do the things that improve those. Does that answer your question?
I actually appreciate that answer a lot, particularly the element of being conditioned in a way that you can't appreciate. Like you don't see that you actually have that inclination and it's sabotaging you.
Yeah.
You get insight into that. And then you learn like, okay, now I know that these are the types of choices I need to start making because of this. And then saying that you need to make those choices, you need to depend on this other force, the bhakti force or this other knowledge to help you to do so. I really appreciate that. I see that as a synthesis of what's going on in my head.
It's also, another example is like, I always give medical examples since I was a physician, is that the doctor can tell you, okay, you need to do your diet and you need to exercise, you need to do this, but you need to make the choice and have the mental discipline to actually go ahead and do those things. It's the same type of thing. So.
Okay, now I want to ask my question, but I want to make a comment before. When you were speaking about recognizing certain tendencies, nature, how that's helpful, it's also helpful in relationships because you understand another person's nature. And you say, why does my wife always do this? Well, because she has that nature. Or why does my temple president not understand A, B, and C? Because he has this nature. Could he improve it? Yes. There may be limitations, it seems, because of their karma, their tendency. So I think that can be very helpful also. Just understanding in general human nature is how deep it is and how karmically it can define for many people who they are: extrovert, introvert, more empathetic, less empathy. I want empathy from my temple president. You go to the astrologer, you go, forget it. It's not his nature. He's a go-getter. He's going to move matter. He makes things happen. He's going to build 10 temples in this city, but he's not going to sit down and listen to you because it's not his nature. So I think that can be helpful. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And that's a very important point. That is correct. This is one of the places where astrology can be so helpful, is in relationships. Whether that's in relationships between two co-workers or two people who are, temple president, or that type of relationship. Certainly between husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend type relationship. And certainly in understanding your own children, and why they act in certain ways and you can't understand them. Everybody has certain inclinations. Everybody has certain ways in which they feel love. Everybody has certain ways in which they express themselves. Everybody has certain ways in which they need to feel other people's appreciation. And if one person has a strong, like Aries nature, they're a go-getter and they're strong and they're the general and they're used to ordering people around and telling them what to do. And the other person is somebody who's like a Cancer nature, where they're very emotional. They need appreciation. They need recognition. They need that emotional support. Well, those two people getting together in a relationship can be traumatic if they don't understand who each other are, And this is a big part of what I deal with. You get people who are put together in a relationship or come together in a relationship. And, people will come for marriage compatibility studies sometimes 5 years after they get married because they're not getting along. And it's like, then you finally sit down and tell them, look, this is what you're like. This is what you're like. This is how you need to respond to this person. This is how you need to respond to, your spouse. And as long as they're willing to do that and they make the choice to respond in that way, things can improve, but yes, and especially with kids, it's very important because you're dealing with, other living entities, other souls, and, they may do things that you don't understand, but you can, if you look at the astrological side of it, you can see this person is not just, oh my God, my child is not listening to me, or my wife is so nasty, I don't understand why she doesn't, do the things I want. You can see this person as, there is this karma and this conditioning they're dealing with. But you can see that deeper than that, they are a spirit soul and they're a servant of Krishna, and they're on that journey back to that path, back to Krishna. So you can see them in both levels, and you realize, okay, this is not some evil person. This is just the karma they're dealing with. But you can definitely use astrology, and you should, to improve your relationships. It's so important, so helpful.
Okay, I have 2 questions about what we've already discussed, and I don't want to forget them, so I'd like to ask them now. The first question is about the example you gave of Saturn and how you can chant mantras. So the natural argument coming from the brahmacharya ashram is, I go to Mangalartik every day. I see the deity. That's like,
Right.
10,000 years of sins gone. Then I see Tulsi, I water Tulsi. And then what to speak, I chant the holy name. That's like all. So it goes back to that argument again. And I was thinking also, like when you were talking about astrology, it was really in relation to grihastas and work and the world and kids. So what if a brahmacharya just says, Forget it. I'm a brahmachari, like I'm like free from sin 100 times a day, like why do I need? So can you address that? Is that correct? Not correct? What's the balance?
We all, whether you're a brahmachari or grihastha or whatever stage your life is in, we all have problems. You can be, a brahmachari and get a health problem. You can brahmachari who has a job and have problem with your coworkers. So what ashram of life we're in doesn't determine whether we're going to have problems or not. You can certainly just say, I'm going to let Krishna take care of everything and deal with it as it comes. But in reality, most people, even the most pakka brahmacharis, whoever you may be, we still have our karma and we're conditioning, and we're not above the difficulties caused by the mind and the body and other beings and nature. So we can simply say, I'm just going to leave it and see what happens, and that's your option. But in many ways, you're not using the best benefits that have been given to you, the knowledge that has been given to you through astrology, through the Vedas, and using it to help your life. You can say, I'm going to eat whatever I want and not exercise, and just whatever happens, happens, and you'll get those results. Or you can say, yes, I chant, I do this, my Mahamantra every day, and I do Tulsi Puja, but I still have these problems in my material life. So devotees can be chanting for 100 years, but we still, old age, disease, and death still come. So it's a question of minimizing those material miseries that are coming upon us. That's basically
there's another question that comes, maybe Karunavatara, you're going to ask this, which is a bit puzzling sometimes, because we talk about the slowing down of karma, pulling the fan, and then you see it doesn't seem to equate to advancement in spiritual life. Some of the more advanced devotees have more challenges with their health than the less advanced devotees. Or you could say maybe they're taking their disciples' karma. Well, let's take them out of the guru category. So this idea that we're becoming free from sin, what does that actually mean? Is it mean we're becoming free gradually from material contamination, or we're becoming free from our karma? But you as an astrologer are saying, no, but we have all this karma, but I've been chanting for 50 years. So why would you understand that from an astrologer's perspective?
Okay. So we have difficulties that come into our life. Whether those difficulties come from our karma or Krishna bring them to us, however we want to look at it, is not the most important question. And the more important question is, when those difficulties come, when those situations come upon us, what is our response? So we don't always choose the situations that come upon us. We certainly don't choose to have a health problem, or someone we love have a health problem, or go through some financial trauma, whatever it may be, or have our parents die. But in that situation, we have a choice. We always have a choice in every situation, and that choice is how we respond to what comes upon us. If we respond to that situation with acceptance and an understanding that Krishna has a deeper plan in my life, and that Krishna is guiding my life in the best way, then that response is perfect. If in that situation we respond with more deeply with anger and frustration and bitterness, and why me, and Krishna, I'm such a great devotee, how could you do this to me? Rather than with gratitude and appreciation, then the response is not as good. So it's not the end result that matters. It's the consciousness with which we respond to the situation that's upon us. So whether you can say whether Krishna's bringing it, or the fan is still spinning but slowing down, in the end, it really depends on what we're doing, and that will determine. Because in the end, the choices we make in the past have determined what situation we're in now, and the choices we make now will determine how our life is in the future, whether it's this life or the next.
Something, yeah. The urge to speak is like overwhelming me right now. Okay. Something that just occurred to me in relation to the first question that Gurudev asked just now is that and I guess it's also a further question that I'll pose is that, Gurudev, you were speaking about this kind of like, this like brahmachari mentality, or this kind of like, pure devotee mentality, like, okay, I'm going to Mongol Arti every day, and I'm seeing the deity, and it's almost like I've seen this a lot, that devotees are executing these external things very like religiously, but then are expecting an automatic result from that. But the thing is that Krishna requires bhakti. So in one sense, what and I'm asking, is this the case? Because in one sense, what Radhikesh Prabhu is suggesting, like, approach Saturn, because it's a purely transactional thing. It's like you don't have to have bhakti. Like, you can just go to Saturn and chant your mantra, but you have to do it respectfully. But you can still do it with like a selfish motive. Like, okay, I'm approaching you respectfully because you can grant this, so that's it. But the thing is, we can't go in front of Krishna in the morning in that mood. Like, it's like, if we're motivated in that way, like, okay, I'm going to Krishna just because I to help me with my material stuff, like, that's not going to work, is it?
That's a very good question. This is where it's important to understand astrology and its limitations. Okay, astrology is a material science. Astrology is there for your material life. It's not spiritual life. It's not bhakti. So this is very important to know. If you want to help your material life, you use astrology. Okay, it's not there to make you. It may help you in your spiritual life to a degree, in that you'll get some deeper understanding of karma and this type of thing, but it's not bhakti. It's not your spiritual life. It is a subtle material science. Just like Ayurveda is a more subtle material science. It's actually even more subtle than that. But it's not bhakti. It's not about your relationship with Krishna, which is at a much higher level.
Well, that leads me to a question. I got a few. First of all, I'm really appreciating how you're carefully dealing with these questions. So thank you for that. I'm led to a question that I imagine may come up for a lot of bhaktas, sadhaka practitioners, of feeling a little bit of shame or like guilt around the idea of approaching, like, around the idea that if I'm indeed qualified for bhakti, if I have bhakti adhikar, and that means shraddha, the shraddha that just by doing bhakti, everything can be accomplished on the one hand. And then on the other hand, dealing with material circumstances and feeling like you genuinely need insight because you're dealing with that. And so going to astrology, I think I can imagine that there could be a little objection in the heart for those who've been around for a little bit, because it seems like a sellout, or like a betrayal of my lack of genuine bhakti adhikar. Like, I don't genuinely have shraddha, because if I genuinely had the shraddha, I can understand that this is Krishna's arrangement, etc. And my response to that will be, to pray to Krishna, to reach out to him, etc. And I think it's a little bit different when you say like breaking your arms, like that's very physical and kind of gross. But when you're doing like subtle circumstances, I can see how devotees might enter into like a spirit of like, a little bit of apprehension, because it seems like, well, adhikar, bhakti adhikar means shraddha, and so I kind of want to see how would you explain this, particularly also at one point. You use this word should. I don't think you were intending it in this way, but the word should kind of implies almost like a moral imperative. You should take advantage of this particular science almost as a moral imperative to help your life. And whereas you can say a lot of ways, like, you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. I have shraddha in Krishna. This is his arrangement. This is necessary suffering for me to come over a threshold in my own conditioning. So how do you reconcile? How do you deal with this maybe like devotee guilt that certainly must be floating around, like a fog of guilt that floats around when you have to take shelter of a material science when you're dealing with your spiritual life.
Sure.
And I see a lot of comments coming that kind of reflect this. There's like two clearly different threads of thinking coming in the comment threads around this. So I'm interested in this.
So this is a very important topic. If you're at this, in theory, you're absolutely right. Oh, just rely on Krishna. This is all you need. Okay, you can say that to anything in any situation. In reality, I don't see that guilt. Actually, the more advanced and senior devotees have less guilt about dealing with this. So, and I talk to many people at every level. So people at the highest levels are much more open about going to an astrologer, getting the guidance as to what's going on there, than perhaps some people who are beginning. So it's about having an understanding, because the mind is still there. The mind still causes us trouble. And that can sometimes cause turmoil in our spiritual life. Because if the mind is not as peaceful as it needs to be, it can cause difficulties in our chanting, in our understanding. And sometimes people go through very serious things, at least that are in their perception quite serious. And it makes them unable to focus on their spiritual life, even if they've been around chanting for 50 years. It gives them some confusion because some big turmoil comes into our life. So if you're a very advanced to where you've overcome your karma and your conditioning, and you're not affected by the modes of nature and all of these things, you will have no problems. You don't need to turn to astrology. You don't need to do anything, But for the majority of us, this is not the case. We need, we can, I won't use the word should, we can get guidance and clarity as to what's going to happen, and then we get a timeline. Okay, I have this problem. It's going to go away at this time. And we can get some peace in that regard. And the other thing to look at is, if you look at the Srimad Bhagavatam, Maharaj Yudhishthira in first canto, chapter 12, this is the birth of Maharaj Parikshit. You look at verse 12, where Prabhupada talks about the purport talks about stellar influences on our life are factual events. This is where Maharaj Yudhishthira is doing the birth for prediction. You look at verse 29 of that same chapter, where they talk about how astrology is essential for a Vedic society. So that chapter talks in so much detail about the value of astrology and what value Prabhupada places on astrology. So I don't see that guilt when people come. In fact, once people have a deeper understanding, it's just like, would you expect a devotee who is, now 75 years old, who's having some aches and pains or having some serious illness, to just say, forget it, I'm going to depend on Krishna? That you can do that, certainly. But the intelligent thing to do would be to take advantage of the material knowledge that's around you to help your arthritis or your blood pressure or whatever problem you're having, and take some medicine. A lot of times people don't turn to astrology, or may not seem to turn to astrology, because it brings, it's more subtle, and they're not completely aware of it. They don't see it in front of them. But as people become more advanced in their Krishna consciousness, a lot of them realize that there are so many subtle energies around that are helping us, and they become much more aware of this science. They actually start to use it for their benefits, whether it's for their health or peace of mind or whatever.
I'm going to piggyback on Jai Jagannath's question. You were mentioning in Srila Prabhupada's books, he talks about astrology.
Yes.
It definitely talks about it. There's no question. But in ISKCON, he didn't really introduce it. Like, every temple should have an astrologer and everyone should go. And so I think that's a really, it's an important principle in terms of just understanding Prabhupada. He said lots of things, but what did he actually prescribe? So that would be one of the stronger arguments I think devotees would give. Okay, we understand it's a science. When we establish Varnashram, then we're going to introduce these Vedic sciences for the world who are not devotees. But he didn't do that in ISKCON. So if he didn't establish it in ISKCON, like he was marrying couples, you marry this one. He didn't check the astrology. Of course, they're all divorced now. You could say that. But But you know what I'm saying? You know, it seemed like it was like Prabhupada's mood was like more like you were saying, I'm 75 with arthritis and this and that, but I have the mentality of like, I don't care, you know, it's just like, I just want to depend on Krishna, you know. And I admit that I have that mentality a lot because it seems that's was Prabhupada's mentality. Like, you know, he said, whatever will happen, just depend on Krishna. So I always felt like, okay.
Of course. And
How would you deal with that argument that, you know, he validates it in his books, but it doesn't seem to be validated in practice of how he instructed us, because he never instructed us to go to astrologers.
I think there's a couple of things. Certainly, Prabhupada was in a very emergent situation with all the things he had to do in establishing preaching centers, spreading this message all over the world. So I can't speculate as to why he didn't do it. Okay, but what I can say is, I certainly can't speak in any way for why Prabhupada didn't do it. So maybe I'll leave that question alone for that part of it. But what I will say is, generally, if someone's in a situation where they're trying to establish something spiritual, and then there's a smaller material thing they're trying that may be part of that, they're going to focus on the spiritual side and let time bring the rest of it in. Just like there's many things that, in terms of deity worship, that we do now that weren't done when the movement was in its beginning stages. But I certainly am in no position to speak.
Yeah. Well, one time, when devotees were getting more into astrology, and, you know, don't do this Thursday afternoon, and you have to do this Friday morning before 10, and this and that. Prabhupada did follow that. He didn't meet Indira Gandhi. It was a Thursday afternoon. He said it's inauspicious.
Yes.
And it was a big thing, you know, to meet her. You know, that was one of the major things he wanted to do, to get visas for his devotees. But then, well, Prabhupada said, you know, if I follow all these rules, I can't do anything, because, you know, by 11 o'clock, I have to come home. I don't wanna go out, you know? It has to be tomorrow at 3 o'clock.
Yeah,
So,
be practical in astrology. You know, it's like you use astrology for your benefit. It's like if you go to the doctor, every time you sneeze or cough, you're going to be at the doctor every day. You know, so you don't practice of the things that are important to you. You know, if you're going to have surgery done, you know, you may want to pick astrologically which is the best time to have surgery done. But, you know, if you're going for a jog or you're going for a bike ride, no, you don't need to check the astrology every time you do that. Check the things that are important.
One of the things that I think we have to keep in mind, Prabhupada had devotees, brahmacharis at that time, who wanted to be like into astrology or Ayurveda and this and that. And he'd be like, no, you're brahmachari. We just want to preach, spread Krishna consciousness. So the focus was so pinpointed, and he didn't want to deviate that. So that's why you find it in his books. And I don't think he chastised generally anybody, but for going to astrologers. But it's just, he did, you know, if Prabhupada said, yeah, just do it, then every brahmachari would be seeing their astrologer every week. And, you know, I can't go on Sankirtan today because I have to see my astrologer. So we have to take these things into account, because then it kind of answers that question, at least to some degree. There may be things he wanted, but if he introduced them, we would become eccentric about it or bewildered by it or something. You know? So I think we have to understand that. But I wanted to ask another question, piggybacking on predetermination, because this one is, I have an idea based on what I understand, and I want to throw it out at you. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, we remember the story of Ramchandra Puri, who offended Nityananda Prabhu. And his whole village was devastated. Like, you know, the gang came, you know. So it appears that due to his offense, quote unquote, innocent people suffered because of the offense of one. And, you know, when you talk about karma philosophically, you say, well, whatever is happening, good or bad, is predestined. And it's like, you know, it's like a menu. You ordered this, and this is what you're getting, and the proportions and so on. But then we see the parents take the karma of the children. The guru takes the karma of the disciples. Here, that whole village looked like they took on his karma. So could you tell us a little bit something about like group karma? You know, you have a leader in the country, and he's negligent, and then the country becomes sick with COVID because he didn't take some precaution. Was everyone destined to get COVID, or was it a karmic reaction of a bad leader? How do we understand that, or is it impossible to understand it?
I think it's unnecessary at one level to understand it because we have to deal with the realities that are before us. So we don't, whether the karma comes from Krishna or, a bad leader or offenses, in the end, we have that reaction and we have to deal with it. So that's the most important thing to understand. And I think at some level, perhaps it is understandable because, if you elect a certain leader, you get a certain percentage of his karma. I think it's 1/6 they speak of in the Shastras, and I might be wrong about that.
The leader gets 1/6 of the people's karma.
So he gets 1/6. So you're getting a certain amount of karma, but if you elect that person, you'll deal with some of the things that are related to that. But whether that's coming from one level or another, it doesn't really matter. It's that we have to deal with it. But whatever it is, we can do things to minimize that in our own life, that karmic influence. We have good karma, like people who die together in a plane crash or things like that. There's some karma they had to be in that place all at the same time, and if you looked at their charts, it would reflect something like that.
What about okay, now we're going to get into something juicy and controversial to wake all the listeners up. So I think this is an important question, but we can generalize it to vax or not to vax. If I have my karma, I'm going to die in a certain way. So, someone say, don't vax because it could kill you. And someone said, vax because if you don't, you could die. Oh, yeah, whatever. I'm going to die. I have my karma, so vaccine, not vaccine. How do we deal with that? Is that a totally impractical way of thinking? Just like let material nature do whatever it does and don't worry about it because you have your karma? But if I have my karma and I'm taking practical action, just not astrological action, just practical action to either vax or take a lot of nutrients so I don't get sick, whatever it is. How do you understand that in relation to karma and, it's karma and practical action? I wear a seatbelt, but why should I wear a seatbelt? If I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And if it's my karma, I'm going to die. And, if I don't wear the seatbelt, I'll get thrown out the window and I'll live. And if I wear the seatbelt, then I'll get thrown against something and die. How do you understand that?
So everybody has certain inclinations. And if you look on people's birth charts, you'll see inclinations to where they may be, pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. They want to do things. And I'm not going to get into that debate of whether that's
that show would go on for 12 hours if we got into that debate. Our astrological charts will show certain inclinations, certain choices we're kind of inclined to make. And then it's, in that decision, we will, in that time frame, in that situation, we have to choose what's best, okay? And the choices we make will give us the results. If you're having, if you're thinking about getting a COVID vaccine and you have, multiple conditions that put you at risk, you may think about getting it, But if you look at an astrological chart, you do a prashna. A lot of people come and they'll do a question chart. Should I get a vaccine? Is my health in danger in the next, 2 weeks? You can give them an answer. It's astrologically, this is what it shows, that choosing to take that practical action is your free will. You'll choose. It's not like you're astrologically determined to get the vaccine. There may be some inclination, but you have the choice to make whether you do that. So that's where you kind of, astrology will take you up to a certain point and show you, you're more likely to do this. You may benefit from doing this, but then you're going to decide, you're like, oh no, I heard this podcast. They said don't do it, so I'm not going to do it. That's your choice in the end. But astrology can't tell you, like, you're going to get COVID or not if you do this or that?
Astrology can tell you if you're going through a bad period related to your health. If there's certain I'll look at somebody's chart and say, okay, yeah, this next 1 month, you have sun in the 12th house. This indicates, that your health may be quite bad during this time. So you have to be careful. And then
you are predisposed to to potentially getting COVID in this particular time, right?
yes, or whatever illness it may be. You can
Yes.
if it's a lung infection, you can see indications that indicate, okay, yeah, this is a lung related problem you may get or something like that. That there is a risk during this time. So if I were you, I would do something to mitigate that. And whether they choose to get a COVID vaccine or just take more nutrients and supplements is up to them. I don't tell them exactly what they need to do in terms of get a vaccine or not, because might get my head cut off by somebody.
Smart move. I want to switch gears a little bit here. I think you've done well to kind of deal with some of the sort of philosophical apprehensions someone might have around the subject matter, as the intersection between astrology and bhakti and so on. And people will have their convictions philosophically around that. I wanted to switch gears into how you have, because you're a life coach also, and how you've used astrology to help people to respond to their karmic inherence in a way that it's been like liberating, or help them to have breakthroughs. That's the tagline of the tagline of Arise is breakthrough.
Breakthrough.
So how do you use, because, and you've talked about this earlier in this episode, that yes, now you have a sense of your inclinations, of your karmic inheritance, but what's important, whether it's coming from Krishna or it's your Daiva, what's important is how you respond to that. And that's the part that's not going to be predictable, because it depends on the living entity encountering circumstances and how it's going to respond to that. So I'm going to switch gears to how you have seen, like in your life coaching work and using astrology in that work, how you've seen that help people respond in healthier ways, or make the necessary breakthroughs they need to make when encountering their karmic inheritance. It's a little bit of a different dynamic, because the philosophical part, people are going to be, that will be an ongoing debate, because it's very abstract and very subtle. But how you impact your clients' lives is very real and practical. And maybe you can share how you've used astrology to help people, respond and make those breakthroughs that are for their life.
So, astrology can look at the science of astrology. You can see what is happening, the next month, the next week, the next year. If you're going through some turmoil or difficulty, or this problem is coming, or that problem may come. And so you can use that to say, look, I expect that this particular day, or over these 3-4 days, you may have a problem where you're very stressed out, or your father may be ill, or your brother may have this problem, or you're going to lose some money during this time. And then the person can kind of be prepared for that, or understand that that problem is going to happen. And then perhaps make some choices to minimize that influence. But at the same time, what it does, it helps them understand that they don't have full control over everything that happens in their life. And that's one thing. It also tells them that, ups and downs will come with life related to our karma. It also tells them there's a time frame of these things that are coming. And it also allows them at a very practical level to see that, this difficulty was meant to come into my life, and I will deal with it in a practical way as best as I can and accept the results that come. So it really empowers people to make the right decisions and be able to, at a much deeper level, with a much stronger foundation, say, no matter what happens, there is this karma and these things, whatever that karma is coming from, that I have to deal with in my life. And I'm going to do the things that are necessary, practically deal with it, but at the same time, go deeper into my own spiritual life, so I don't have to deal with karma in the future, and I can go back to Krishna at the end of this life. So this is the key, which I try to help people with, is that what is your ultimate goal? To some degree, your ultimate goal is our material benefit. But at the same time, we have to look at the long term. We want to eventually leave this world and go back to the spiritual world and be with Krishna and serve there. And so we have to do the things at each level to get us there. So that's what I try to help people do, to get through the immediate karmic things that are going on and give them the mental strength and minimize the planetary influences that they're dealing with, and give them an understanding. You're going to maybe lose your job in about 1 month on this particular day. Just be prepared for that. It may happen. And for the most part, people are, empowered once they are able to have that understanding, because they actually have when they have that understanding, they actually have more control of the things that are going on in their life. If you look at some of the reviews people have been left for Google on my for me, it's all about how they're feeling more empowered and stronger in their own life. And then they, at some point, they realize everything is under control in one way or another. Just because we don't see it or we're not completely aware of it, it's still there.
I find that to be so fascinating because that's a big talking point when you encounter the Bhagavad Gita, for example, or the Bhagavatam, but specifically the Gita. You're not in control, and that's one of Prabhupada's major talking points. And somehow when we hear it philosophically, it doesn't translate. And so when we're encountering life, we're like trying to keep all the pieces together, and we're not able to acknowledge that we're not in control. And what you're saying is that you're using astrology to help people realize that they're not in control, and that somehow empowers them in their life. I just find that to be kind of interesting.
That's actually exactly right. Astrology is like a bridge. It's a bridge science. It can help you understand your material life and understand to a degree that you have a spiritual nature. But what it does, if I do a reading for somebody, I tell them 10 things that nobody else could ever know about them. And this happens all the time.
Right. That's how I got faith.
Yeah, like, I'll tell somebody, oh, okay, you had a miscarriage this year, and they're, halfway across the world. Or I'll tell them, okay, this year you moved into a house or bought a new house, whatever it may be. Or this is the year you had your appendix taken out. After a while of doing that, they're going to be like, okay, this guy knows something that's going on. And basically, you can use that to deepen your faith in Krishna. And as your faith and understanding of your relationship with Krishna deepens, you are naturally empowered to live your life in the best, most powerful way, and the most devotional way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's very appreciable. Especially for those who are a little apprehensive, like, what is this astrology stuff? You're saying how you're using it to actually bring them to like core metaphysics of belief in God, actually.
Of course, if you can give them some practical things, like I said, you tell them a few things that have happened in the past, and that's one thing I do in all my readings. We go through the past first, you can see when they got married, when they had children, and I try to explain to them, look, I've never met you before, but I've told you when you got married and when your children were born, because you had this karma and this inclination at this time for these things to happen. And all of this is because, these planetary beings may be there, but overall Krishna is controlling everything. And through these energies, Krishna is there. And this is how your karma is manifested. Your birth chart is basically a roadmap of your karma from however number of lives in the past.
So I have a question on life coaching not in terms of existential problems, like you're going through a difficulty in 3 months, but internal problems, and how you would help somebody understand their samskaras, and also if they have some kind of addiction, maybe not to drugs, but an addictive nature, can you actually help them with that? And how would you help them with that? And all the ways, because that's what I do. I help people change their nature, their psychology, their emotions. So I've never used astrology, so that's particularly interesting to me, how you do deal with that.
So astrologically, you can help at many different levels. If they have certain predispositions to addictions, which, a Scorpio effect can cause a risk of addictions. If you have the moon in certain places, it can cause a risk of being negatively influenced by other people. And there's some other things you can look at. So if you see those things, number one, you explain that to the person. Hey, look, you have this inclination, you have this predisposition to behaving in this way because of this particular planetary issue, that, you're like this and this and this, and this is what Mars does, or this is what the moon does, or this is what Saturn does. And first of all, a lot of times they're not even aware of that. Most times they're not aware of that. So once they become aware of that, that in itself is very powerful in them saying that, okay, maybe I have a problem. And then once they have that recognition, then you can take that next step in them getting over it. So if it's a planetary issue that's causing a big problem, well, you can do things to minimize that planetary influence. And sometimes it's much more practical than that. You can say, look, you're influenced very much by the people who are around you because of this Scorpio in your chart. You need to be around good people, stop being around people who drink and take drugs or, watch pornography or whatever it may be. And that in itself is enough of a suggestion for many people that, okay, maybe I should associate with the right type of people. And sometimes that's enough. You don't need to do anything else. But sometimes you need to do more subtle things to help them.
Or would you recommend, for example, you could see they have a very strong addictive nature. So in the idea of association, you would recommend you need a 12-step program because you'll never overcome this. It's just that you're making a prognosis that maybe someone else couldn't make without astrology. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes, that's kind of the idea. It's things that you can see and you can make the person aware of, hey, this is what's going on. Because there's some people who try forever to overcome their addictions, but they don't. Actually, a lot of people don't. But when they see that, okay, I have this, Scorpio, whatever planetary influence is there, I'll tell them you can do it this way, and they'll try it, whether it's a 12-step program or associating with the right type of people, chanting, meditation, whatever it may be. But then if that doesn't work, then we add in some planetary mantras to really, take care of the problem at the root level, and things can get much improved in that way.
So you've seen that in your experience, that like these mantras actually work? They neutralize the effects?
These mantras have a very powerful effect. Again, these are material ritualistic activities. This is not our spiritual life. But if they're done in the right way with humility and respect, they can have a very powerful influence. I had somebody come to me, this was maybe 3-4 weeks ago, who were having trouble with their child. Child was probably 30, they're probably in their 50s, 60s, and child hadn't talked to them in a while, like they were having some fighting, they weren't talking. And it was a Saturn effect in her chart. I said, chant the mantra and things will get better. She called me a few days later. She chanted the mantra on Saturday. On Sunday, her daughter showed up at her house. So yes, these can be very, very powerful effects. It's just a question of us trying it and doing it. And they're naturally required to respond to us, these planets.
We have to talk a little bit about marriage before we end. I just want to save time for that.
I also have one very pressing question, and we'll get to both. There's enough time. Jai, what do you want to say, Prabhu?
I'm almost losing it. I was going to ask about, just to this last point, when people are doing, I've seen this with life coaching a lot, when devotees, they've been chanting Hare Krishna for a while, they're having difficulties, the Hare Krishna stuff doesn't seem to be working, or is not having the impact on their material life that they would hope that it should have. And so they go to some other alternative thing to help with the material part. And they're getting practical, real-time results with that. You just gave an example of the mantra. And then they become like a heart divided. And I have seen it in my time where people shift, their faith gets shifted from, Krishna consciousness to like this thing, whether it's like maybe some, I don't know, family constellation thing, or it's astrology, or it's this or that, where they're able to get the real-time results. They become like a heart divided, and they may actually lose their Christian consciousness, which I feel like is kind of a talking point for people who would like say this astrology thing is nonsense, for example.
Our Krishna consciousness is the most important thing in our life. Our bhakti, our spiritual growth, is the most important thing. When difficulties come in our spiritual life, it is actually the best opportunity, the most wonderful opportunity to go deeper in our relationship with Krishna. We have a choice to make, like at any other situation. If we choose to run away from Krishna during that difficulty, then we've made the choice which is not beneficial and is not going to be helpful for us. And if we turn to something else, it can be in addition to our spiritual life, but the deep foundation of everything we do should be surrender of our life to Guru and Krishna. And we can use any material science to help us. There's no problem with somebody using a 12-step program or an astrologer or any of these things to help them with their material life if they're having difficulties. But it should not be a substitute for a crutch in terms of, not a crutch, that's not the right word. It should not be a substitute for your spiritual life and service to Krishna. Use the difficulties in your life only to go deeper into your spiritual relationship with Krishna. But where astrology can be helpful, especially for the type of people you're talking about, Prabhu, is when the mind troubles us, astrology gives clarity. It shows us, yes, I have this problem right now. It's going to go away in a few months. Don't worry. It's going to go away in 3 years. Don't worry. If this is a Saturn effect, let's do this. This problem will go away. But that shouldn't change our relationship with Krishna. This is just tests that he's putting us through. And he's giving us the tools to get over it also.
Can I ask a question? Because you just brought up something that I deal with a lot of people that are culturally conditioned by their upbringing to be a certain way. Let's say their parents mistreated them. So now they have low self-esteem, or they really need to be appreciated by people. And if people don't appreciate them, they resent them, something like that. Would that be something that you would see in their karma, or is that just a consequence of a particular culture that they're raised in, and all the parents were like that with their kids, and how do you distinguish, or again, does it really matter?
You definitely can see something like that in their astrological chart. Actually, it's something we see very commonly. I did a reading for somebody, what is today? Saturday, probably. This was, I believe, Thursday. No, what is today? Today's Tuesday, Monday, whatever. Tuesday. This was last week. If you look at her, she came across as very powerful, strong, Ivy League graduate, has a very good job. And when I looked at her chart, externally, everything was very strong and powerful. But internally, the moon was in such a weak position that internally she was like a completely broken person. And we talked about that. And she said, 100%, this is who I am. This is how I live my life. I'm barely getting by. So you definitely see these things astrologically. And that's something that you can work on and fix. So to a degree, there may be some cultural conditioning, but most of it is something, and they're born into a certain culture because they're meant to get certain karmas also. And so that's something then you can work on and fix. But yeah, that's something we definitely can see astrologically.
How do you fix it?
At many different levels. So whenever somebody has, say, some psychological issue or depression or low self-esteem, you work on it. You use all the different tools you have. At the highest level, this is your relationship with Krishna, and Krishna is always there for you, and he's walking with you at every step, and he loves you, and these are the goals of our life. Then at another level, you look at the astrological problems related to the moon or Saturn or Rahu or whatever's causing the issues, and you fix those. Then at another level, if needed, you work on going to a counselor or taking some medicine, Ayurvedic medicine that may help you. And then if that's not enough, then at another level, people may go on, antidepressants and things like. There's many different levels you can work at this on. So you work at the subtle levels, and if that's not enough, you can work at the more gross levels to help us.
Thank you.
Prabhu, I would like to just come back to something that I to add on to something that I asked before, which basically comes down to the following: that we find ourselves in an age of like widespread entitlement. People think like we really see this phenomenon manifest, or we really see it like in the realm of life coaching. Like life coaching is like the wild west of the self-development industry, in the words of Heather Demetrios, where like people think that whatever little bit of like knowledge and experience and perhaps some some crystallized realization they've gained in their time now entitles them to be a life coach and to be giving guidance to other people and so on. And where it's just like such a big thing, right? So astrology, we can definitely put astrology in the, you could say, you could categorize it as part of the domain of the helping professions, right? So the helping professions are defined as different kinds of psychologists, counselors, social workers. These kinds of people are all in the helping professions. Now, these particular professions have, you know, certain there are certain criteria to being a qualified psychologist or a mental health counselor or so on. But there's no real way of like standardizing the adhikar of astrologers. So like what qualifies a person? What is your sense? Like what
Right.
really qualifies a person to be an astrologer? Like what is the kind of training and experience that needs to be gone through until a person is truly ready to step into this role? Because it takes so much discernment. Because, for example, Prabhu, what if you have someone's time slightly wrong and they don't know that their time is wrong, and you have no way of telling that either, and they think that their time is right, and then you give them guidance like on the basis of that wrong time, and it ends up being completely wrong, and they make all kinds of decisions, and it's just really a big problem. Or let's say someone says they don't know exactly when they're what their birth time was, but it was approximately between this time and this time. So obviously that's going to require like really, really careful discernment. So anyway, what qualifies a person to be in your, and I just want to also say that like I'm not questioning your qualification per se,
I understand.
but
I
just
understand the question.
in general.
Yeah. The first and most important thing to understand is that astrology is a Brahminical activity. So for someone to perform a Brahminical activity, they have to live a Brahminical life, a life of following the regulative principles, a life of devotion, a life of humility and service. So this is very important for someone to be qualified. The other thing that's important is they have to understand that their knowledge and their empowerment to do this comes from Krishna. So that's also important. And third, they have to understand that this is a very sacred duty and opportunity that they've been given. And fourth, and most importantly, and I think we touched on this at the beginning, is that they have to understand that this knowledge should be used for good, to use it for compassion and kindness, to bring Krishna's message to people in this world, to understand their ultimate position in this world. You know, you can use astrology. Somebody asked me this recently. Why can't I use astrology to pick my lottery numbers or the stock market or whatever it may be? And I said, you can certainly use it for many different things. You can use astrology to find out the best time to kill someone. You know, you can use it for many different things. But that's the best way of describing that is the dark side of the force. Okay, you don't want to go there. So stay on the good side. You know, be like Luke Skywalker and not Darth Vader, and use it for the best. But if you have those underlying principles in your spiritual life, and your astrology, the person you go to for astrology will be qualified. So look at that. And then the other things, you know, you look at is, are the results they're giving you correct? You know, just like you go to find a doctor or a counselor or a guru, you know, you'll ask other people around about them. You'll see the things they've spoken of. You'll look at their Google reviews, you know, for your doctor, whatever it may be. And that will all help you give guidance on how you choose.
Does ISKCON have a guru review website?
I don't know. Maybe they do.
In the future.
HRGuru.com. Yeah, maybe.
I need a 5-star guru, yeah. We need a 5-star astrologer. Can we ask
Right.
the marriage question now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I want to get married, and we decide we should do our chart to see if we're compatible. So we go to you, and it's not looking so good. So does that mean it's going to be a difficult marriage and we're going to really have to work on it? There's a good chance we're just going to be miserable. Or the chart looks really good. Does it mean, okay, this is going to be a breeze? And or what if the astrologer just types the dates into the computer, gets the printout and gives it to them and asks for $100 and they just read it? Can the computer figure it out on its own? So I'd like you to answer those three questions.
Okay, that's a lot right in there. We'll start with the last question first about computer printouts and things like that. If you want a computer printout, you can do it yourself, okay? If you go on Google and type in that you have a cough, it can tell you all the 1 million things that cause a cough, and it can go from, cold to lung cancer, whatever it may be. That doesn't tell you anything. If somebody just gives you a computer printout, that's not giving you any information. So don't go with a computer printout for anything. Everything I do, I interpret, I spend all the time myself to figure that out. And any astrologer, let me be careful how I say this, astrologers should use their own knowledge rather than a computer printout to give you their interpretation.
So that number of compatibility is just one indicator. Is that correct?
Yes. Whether it's for compatibility or for something else, they should always use that. Compatibility studies, there's such a variation in how people do it. I use 20 different points to look at to see what is really important and what's not in a relationship. So there's very few times where it's like everybody, two people are in love and they think it's great and the chart is horrible. Or the opposite where they hate each other, but the chart is great. That doesn't usually it's kind of weird. So what you don't really see when you do a reading is that you'll see areas where there's incompatibility. So there may be like, okay, your way of communicating is not something he will understand, or your way of your actions will not be pleasing to him, or that you have more of a Brahminical nature and he's got more of a Shudra nature. So that's the first thing that you talk about. This is your nature. This is his nature. This is how it's going to manifest. Look, you've got a Brahminical nature. You're going to, come home at the end of the day and you're going to want to chant and have a nice vegetarian meal and, go walk in nature. He's going to want to come home at the end of the day, play some music and watch a soccer game, football game, whatever it may be. I said, that's the things that are going to be there. That's how it's going to manifest. And then it's a question of those people being aware of that and saying, oh, okay, maybe we need to talk about this. Maybe we need to understand that. But then there's the subtle levels at which you can see things. Astrology, marriage compatibility charts look at both your general nature, your psychological nature, your subtle influences from the nakshatras and the planets. And it looks at, things like your physical compatibility, sexual compatibility, how that's going to do. So you can see all of those things that you may be unaware of, and you can look at every level and then say, these are the places where things are great, emphasize these. These are the places where there are problems. These are the things you need to do that will minimize those negative effects. And as long as you can do that, then the situation would be good. Now, sometimes we do get a situation where two people want to get married. I had this last week where they were in love, they wanted to get married, but the compatibility was not so enough to where the parents felt comfortable with the kids getting married. So in that situation, a lot of times what you can do is if you get married at the right time, like an auspicious time when all the planetary energies are aligned, it really minimizes those negative effects. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things you can do, even if the compatibility is not optimal to where you can get married. But you can do, these, it's called a muhurta, picking the right time for marriage. And when you do that, a lot of that negativity can be minimized. But you should definitely do a compatibility study before marriage because you'll find out many things, both about yourself and about your partner. Not just your overall natures, but what the future brings. I had a reading a couple of weeks ago where this boy was going to get married, and he hadn't actually met the girl, somebody his parents arranged, but she's got some very heavy karma coming up in about 10 years. You know, illness, psychological problems that are going to last for like 18 or 20 years. It's like one thing after another. And I was like, absolutely, you can get married, but you have to be aware that these things are going to be there, and you will have to deal with these and help her and support her through this. But you've got to, you know, see whether you're ready for that. And so that's something he had to think about and really meditate on before he did it. But this is something that you can also be aware. What's in your future? What's in your health future, your money future? What's in your partner's future? So you can make the wisest decision for yourself.
Thank you.
That's I feel like that opens up a whole nother can of worms, which we're gonna keep closed for now. Are there any like final thoughts you would like to share about astrology that you feel would be important, especially speaking to like a devotee audience, or things?
Yeah, the key thing for devotees to understand is that astrology is a material science. It's a subtle material science, and as Prabhupada spoke about it, it's about just like medicine and law and engineering. It's a science, and you use it to help you make your life a little bit better and more comfortable. This is not your bhakti, but it can make the path of bhakti a little smoother because your mind and material life can be peaceful in that way. But this is, I think, one very important point to understand. Astrology is a material science to help your material life.
I don't know if anyone has anything else they would like to say before we close out here, but thank you very much, Dr. Radhikesa Prabhu. I see you have a very sober and kind of methodical approach, which really deeply resonates with me. My own way of articulation and communication is pretty methodical and kind of like, people have called me stoic or disassociative. And I'm very much appreciating just like the clarity and precision of articulation, and also careful handling of the questions. Thank you very much for your presence here. I don't know if anyone wants to share any final thoughts, but I wanted to just say thank you for agreeing to come on and share your knowledge. And
yeah, well, if anybody wants his services, we're putting his website, and you can go to his website.
radhikesdas.com. It's been okay. Anyway, Karuna, you got this part.
Yeah. So
yes,
that's if we go over what we're discussing, we're talking about many things, and it could be individual personal issues and understanding your nature better. I think also, when you understand you have this nature, it's a little easier to accept yourself instead of you trying to change yourself for 20 years and beat your head against the rocks. No, this is how I am. I'm not going to be a sannyasi in this life. It's just like, accept it, Prabhu. You don't have that nature. That would have been good for a lot of those sannyasis at 22 who took a dive to know that actually you're a grihasta by nature. You shouldn't do this. So it can be... am I ready for initiation? Am I ready to be married? What do I have to do to get married? Is this the right one? Situation. So it's so many things that, as Radhikesa is saying, will benefit you spiritually. So if you like what you heard and you think he can help you, then you can contact him.
Yes, I can give testimony to that. Radhikesa Prabhu and I had a conversation on Friday, and he elucidated on various aspects of my life, which were very much on point. There's a little bit of uncertainty about my birth time, so some of the things that he said, like the timing was a little bit off, but that's on me. He still, the consistency of how the timing was slightly off was consistent. So in other words, I feel completely satisfied with how Radhikesa Prabhu gave me insights, and he's very methodical. He progresses through all the various aspects of life and is fully qualified to give insights in all these different realms. So certainly, please take advantage of his services. Yes, Gurudev.
I also want to add that I've been married for quite some time, and the one thing I can say about married life is that I think anyone who's married realizes this sooner or later. You have to really understand yourself, and like Radhikesh was saying, you really have to understand your partner, because you'll want your partner to be like you, and you'll get frustrated when your partner isn't like you. And obviously, that's not realistic. And there's so many things you can think and do to destroy a marriage. Even two compatible people who are emotionally immature and don't understand one another can create hell for themselves. And so, if you're going to be married, the understanding these things that Radhikesh was talking about is essential, because you have a responsibility to this person you're marrying to be the best you can and to be the most compassionate, kind, understanding, supportive, et cetera, and I think a lot of us, like Karuna Avatar always tells me, he said, I was like a mama's boy or spoiled, or I didn't have to, but I was the same, rich Jewish parents and never had to work, and just like, had a car when I was 16 and everything I wanted. And marriage is a real sacrifice, especially when you have children. And I think some people are just not mature enough for it. They fall in love, but they don't realize that there's 100 other things you have to do to make it work. So the more you can do to ensure that you understand yourself and you understand your partner, the better. You can never overdo it, because that's what's going to ensure that your marriage lasts. And that is obviously what we want to do. So I think his services can be invaluable in that area.
I just want to add a very brief little quote that I heard the other day that illustrates a lot of what Gurudev just said. Is like, it is only when we, and this is up for debate, but I resonate, and it says that it's only when we set ourselves fully in order, when we render ourselves fully in order, that we become fully lovable, right?
Yes.
So,
At least conventionally speaking, absolutely yes.
Yeah, some people want to be loved, but they do everything to turn you away, and then they're mad at you because you don't love them. So I like that. Yeah, I would say I say we could add to that. If you want to be married and have a good marriage, that you have to be lovable. And also, we understand from psychology that people treat you the way you treat yourself. So if you don't even love yourself, you make it difficult for other people to love you. And people tend to take advantage of people who have low self-esteem, who feel they're unworthy of love. And if you feel you're unworthy of love, you feel uncomfortable when people love you, and you don't want them to love you. And I've read in some books that people who have some trauma around this, when the relationship gets good, subconsciously they'll hijack the relationship because it's getting too good and they're uncomfortable with it. So there's so much stuff, as we know, going on inside. Like Radhikesh said, there's a lot of stuff I tell people they don't even know exists. There's so many subtle things going on inside. And when you get married, it's like, okay, the curtain was just pulled and you start to see all these things about yourself. It would be better if you were aware of them before, so you could be prepared, quote unquote, for the battle. It's not a battle, but prepared for what you're entering into. I can't underestimate that. It's essentially important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that, you got to know what's going on so that you can accept yourself, so that you can begin to love yourself. Gurudev just posted a really great video on self-love and self-care and the indispensable, vital importance thereof on his Instagram. So everyone can also go and check that out. It's really insightful. Radhikesh Prabhu, once again, thank you so much for coming and for, it's like you really held the space and you answered everything so seamlessly and so fluidly, and it was really wonderful hearing from you. Thank you for coming. And Gurudev, thank you for coming and co-facilitating and bringing up this idea. And Jai Jagannath Prabhu, I love you. You're always by my side. He hates it when I get sentimental. Okay.
I'm one of those people, if I get too much love, I sabotage the thing.
We had this, in the old days, like, Prabhu, you're sentimental,
Yeah.
It's like you and Maya.
I got a little bit of that.
Sentimental, it has a bad rap in ISKCON, but, I think Lord Chaitanya was a bit sentimental, don't you think? Overly sentimental, like kind of emotional, right?
Wow, Gurudev said it. Okay, that's great. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the broadcast. Please stay on, dear Prabhus, just for a second.